Hey everybody, it's Guy McDudefellow, co-chair of the BSides Las Vegas Proving Ground track. Our next talk is entitled I Wish Google Could Just Not Be Evil, a security base of comparison of major and not so major email providers by Jeremy Brown, who was mentored by Cheryl Biswas.
Hello, and welcome to my presentation, Secure Mail Takes Professionalism, a security meta-comparison of notable email providers. Jim Wang said it best, your email address is the center of your digital life. From shopping to social media, cord cutting to crowdfunding, Allstate to OnlyFans, the modern internet collapses without a platform-independent communication hub. Since email is of such critical importance, it is then fundamental that we never lose possession of our email accounts, lest we fall to ruin. We have put our digital eggs in one basket. Now, as Andrew Carnegie once said, we must watch that basket. There are hundreds of commercial email providers on the internet, many boasting about their commitment to their customers' privacy and security. But marketing copy doesn't amount to much when the Ministry of State Security starts poking around. So how is the average netizen supposed to differentiate between who is and isn't full of hot air? I discovered the difficulty of answering this question while searching for a new email provider last year. After reading one too many articles on my Android phone about the tricks Google uses to access user data, I was fed up. I cannot remain in this ecosystem, I said to myself, switching from the Chrome app to the Gmail app to tell my local group of InfoSec nerds more information we kind of knew already. Switching to Firefox was easy, and migrating to iOS was also painless, but email wasn't so simple. Finding a new host for my most precious digital asset required weeks of research, ultimately resulting in this presentation. While conducting my research, I realized the most important category for measuring security is operational competence, the quality of their infrastructure, the maturity of their processes, etc. But finding publicly available information on operational competence is nigh impossible. It's not like companies will brag about their 10-year-old servers that have never seen a Spectre update. This realization was demoralizing until I stopped thinking like a computer scientist and started thinking like an actual scientist, at which point the path forward was obvious. If I can't directly measure operational competence, I'll just have to measure what's most likely affected by operational competence and hope for the best. In the end, I settled on 4 categories I believe cover most security-related concerns and price. To normalize the comparison between providers, I decided to use the Chromeland Security Advisory System. To keep this presentation under 3 hours, I limited my comparison to the largest providers and the most notable privacy-focused providers, with a bone thrown in for the masochists who self-host their email. Beginning with Google, the first category is legal jurisdiction, which covers intelligence sharing agreements and the laws of the country or region where data would be stored. And while I did make an effort to consider other people's situations, my analyses in this category will be from the viewpoint of a U.S. citizen residing in the U.S. Your mileage may vary. Google offers email hosting as part of their cloud services product, which has changed its name twice since I started the slides for this presentation, so I'll call it Google Apps. Google gives customers the option to store their data either entirely in the US, entirely in the EU, or anywhere Google chooses. Unsurprisingly, data stored in the US can be retrieved through normal means such as orders from secret courts, but with the passage of the Cloud Act, foreign governments are now able to demand data from US companies with court orders that haven't been naturalized using a Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, or MLAT. As I am a U.S. citizen residing in the U.S., the Act states foreign governments should not be able to obtain my data through a Cloud Act request, but that's a pinky swear more than anything. Looking internationally, like any respectable tax-dodging multinational corporation, Google's EU headquarters is in Ireland, and Irish laws may come into play. But Google has data centers throughout the EU, and you should generally expect the GDPR to apply to data stored in the EU, with an asterisk for assorted Cloud Act shenanigans. I want to say storing data in the US is no worse than any other privacy-respecting country, but I don't believe I can do so as long as the Cloud Act is in force. Next is security-related features, which covers things that we generally consider such: two-factor authentication or 2FA, decent spam and phishing detection, and a sufficiently robust account recovery workflow. To nobody's surprise, Google has a strong showing with support for 2FA using industry-standard one-time password codes and universal second-factor dongles. The paranoid among us may appreciate the advanced protection program, but since successfully contacting Google support is NP complete, the basic account recovery flow is likely sufficient for most. If social engineers can't get customer support on the phone, they can't steal your account from under you. I hear a lot of gripes about Google spam detection, but since I receive a thankfully small amount of email, I've never really experienced an issue. Security adjacent features is where the categories become a bit more subjective, but I believe these features offer a true benefit to security. Google Apps has native support for a catch-all address, a lifesaver when you want to discover who might be reselling your information. Sometimes you need to reply from an address originally considered one way, requiring the ability to use an alias. Google Apps allows 30 active aliases for each user. Lastly, Google Apps includes access to Google's Office replacement. This may be the most controversial security-related feature, but I think it's the most important. Ransomware is the largest threat to computing today, and macro-laden documents are the most common method of ransomware infection, so documents handled in the cloud aren't documents that can spread ransomware on a local network. Legal resilience is another high subjectivity category that is my attempt to answer the question, how hard will a provider fight for its users? This category consists of all the news articles and court documents I could find showing the provider fighting assorted court orders. I couldn't find that many instances of Google fighting court orders, but the ones I could find were substantial, so I feel comfortable saying Google won't immediately roll over upon receipt of a subpoena. Lastly is price, which I don't assign much weight to since most everyone watching this is overpaid. At the time of this presentation, Google charges $6 per user month for the bottom tier of Google Apps. So for a baseline template of one user as a primary account and one user to hold catch-all emails, expect to spend $144 per year. If the standard 2-month discount for annual prepayment is available, the price drops to $120 per year. After Google is the other 800-pound gorilla of email, Microsoft. Microsoft allows customers to store their data entirely in the US like Google, with similar legal consequences. Internationally, Microsoft also allows customers to store their data either entirely inside Germany or entirely inside France, as well as storing it inside the EU generally. France and Germany are both part of the SIGINT Seniors of Europe, more commonly known as 14 Eyes, but France is part of the more exclusive group known as 9 Eyes. As a member of the EU, data stored in Germany is covered by the GDPR, but Germany has its own data protection law conferring additional rights for data owners and additional responsibilities for processors. All of Google's jurisdictional issues are present with Microsoft, so they get the same rating. Microsoft's implementation of security-related features exhibit the differences between an old tech company and an older tech company. Microsoft offers the standard level of spam and phishing detection for their email offerings by default, but depending on your plan, for an extra charge, customers who store their data outside Germany can enable Defender for Office 365, which claims to offer enhanced virus scanning for incoming attachments, enhanced phishing detection, and link rewriting. 2FA is a mixed bag. While the MS webmail client supports OTP codes across all browsers, Microsoft decided to not support U2F when using Firefox. And for the record, I'm assuming U2F dongles work with Safari, otherwise I have to wonder what they're doing up in Redmond. Microsoft's security adjacent feature set isn't as strong as Google's. The most impactful one is access to an online version of Office. But currently, the only way to get a catch-all address is to use a hack that might not work depending on your plan. Microsoft email accounts get 400 aliases you can reply from, but even though the feature was supposed to have been launched late 2020, it's still not possible to reply from an alias using the Outlook web client. Thankfully, these are ancillary features, but lack of confidence from the wonkiness of 2FA support is compounded by the lack of native support for a catch-all address. Moving to legal resilience, one of the more surprising discoveries from this research is Microsoft's willingness to use its lawyers to fight on their users' behalf in court, successfully quashing multiple gag orders. I wish they'd used those lawyers and lobbyists to shoot down the Cloud Act and make governments go through the MLATs they already had, but I suppose that would have been asking for too much. Finally, there's the question of price, which Microsoft has done its level best to make as difficult to answer as possible. You might have noticed some features were available depending on your plan. That's because, by my count, Microsoft offers no fewer than 13 different products which offer some form of email hosting. Even after discarding the products that require using GoDaddy as a registrar or don't support using custom domains, there's so many needlessly similar ones left, I assume this is some sort of marketing strategy. To be thorough, I asked Swift on Security about lesser-known plans and was told about a Microsoft 365 E621 tenant which offers Outlook Web Online and an unmonitored Windows upgrade license that lets you fully disable telemetry collection. But I haven't been able to find any information about that plan on the Microsoft website. Pricing correlates with desire to embrace the Microsoft ecosystem, but if email and cloud Office are all you need, the top choices are Microsoft 365 Business Basic at $120 per year, or an Office 365 E1 tenant at $192 per year, following the baseline template from before, not counting the extra $2 per user month for Defender for Office 365. The first and largest privacy-focused provider of the comparison is ProtonMail. ProtonMail is headquartered in Switzerland, using data centers in Switzerland and Germany to store its customers' data. As Switzerland is not an EU member, there is no requirement for Swiss companies to conform to the GDPR. However, Article 13 of the Swiss Constitution explicitly grants everyone the right to privacy in relation to their mail and telecommunications, which the Swiss Federal Act on Data Protection says applies to non-citizens as well. Choosing to use a data center in a 14 Eyes country when the company takes such a strong stance on privacy seems strange, but as an outsider, Germany's additional laws on data privacy, on top of the GDPR, look strong enough to provide some comfort. ProtonMail has only basic security features, supporting just OTP codes for 2FA. Alongside spam and phishing detection, their subreddit suggests can be hit or miss. An additional layer of pen-based encryption is available for data stored in their iOS app. ProtonMail's security adjacent feature set is also basic. Professional tier accounts can access catch-all addresses and 5 aliases, with the option to purchase more on a yearly basis. The lack of some cloud substitute for Office increases vulnerability to ransomware, but this is about the best that can be expected from a company without Silicon Valley resources. In terms of legal resilience, despite the number of court orders ProtonMail claims to have challenged in their transparency report, there was no public information supporting such. No news reports covering a legal challenge or court documents available online. It's possible said information is stored somewhere out of sight of search engines, but I find this strange considering I've found information on legal challenges for smaller competitors. In terms of pricing, while ProtonMail's base cost isn't particularly eye-watering, trying to get close to parity with the other providers can get expensive quick. The baseline template costs $16 per user month or $150 per year, but the professional plan only provides 5 aliases per user. Attempting parity with Google's 30 aliases would cost an additional $5 per user month or $45 per year, costing more than the equivalent Microsoft service with fewer features. This is somewhat disappointing, but as stated earlier, this might be the best that can be expected without Silicon Valley resources. ProtonMail's closest competitor is Tutanota. Tutanota is headquartered in Germany and only uses German data centers, so customer data should be protected by both the GDPR and Germany's Data Protection Act. Like with ProtonMail, I see some hypocrisy in operating a company with a strong privacy stance in a 14 Eyes country, but like I said with ProtonMail, Germany's privacy laws should temper most objections. Like ProtonMail, Tutanota doesn't have much in terms of dedicated security features. Tutanota supports U2F dongles in addition to OTP codes for 2FA, but their spam and phishing filters leave much to be desired. Unsurprisingly, Tutanota has a basic security adjacent feature set. Joining at the premium tier grants 5 aliases per user and the ability to use catch-all accounts, but unlike ProtonMail, the additional aliases available for purchase apply across all users in an account. That said, it's currently not possible to set the sender name for individual aliases, so if you want to send an email as ZeroCool instead of Dave Murphy, you have to change your settings so all your email will be sent as ZeroCool until you change it back. No cloud-based Office substitute is available. In regards to legal resilience, I was surprised to find reports of Tutanota standing up for its users in court and fighting a court order to implement mailbox surveillance, despite being such a small company. They lost, but it's the thought that counts here. As Tutanota plans are denominated in foreigner currency units instead of freedom bucks, Tutanota is the only provider in the comparison whose price cannot be directly compared to the others. Currency conversion isn't so difficult, but the numbers are guaranteed to be different between when I created this presentation and when you view it. Creating a premium tier account according to the baseline template costs $2.86 per user month, or roughly $29 per year. The closest package to match Google's aliases costs as much as the email service, bringing the total to roughly $60 per year. The final provider in this comparison is Hushmail, arguably the first privacy-focused email provider, beating Gmail to public release by 6 years. Hushmail has the most unusual corporate structure of all the providers in this comparison. The main company, Hush Communications, is incorporated in Delaware, with its headquarters in Canada, but everyone's data is stored in Canadian data centers and managed by Hush Communications Canada, or HCC, a Canadian subsidiary. HCC has to conform to Canada's GDPR equivalent, and, assuming HCC is based in Vancouver alongside Hush Communications, will also have to comply with British Columbia's data privacy law. Spinning operations into a subsidiary looks strange today, but between compressing data before encryption and the resurgence of Zoot Suits, I'm willing to chalk that up to 90s weirdness. Hushmail claims not to be subject to US court orders. Perhaps being headquartered in Canada does void US jurisdiction, but absent seeing some case law, I don't believe this theory and consider it a US provider. Moving to security-related features, Hushmail's feature set matches other smaller providers, with support for only OTP codes for 2FA. That said, when 2FA is enabled, Hushmail automatically generates an app password for connecting to POP and IMAP without going through 2FA, and somehow that app password includes your normal user password. There are potential ways to do this that don't require the normal user password to be stored in plain text, but their failure to explain how this system works concerns me. Hushmail's security-adjacent features are somewhat better than the other smaller providers. Business tier accounts get unlimited aliases using a Hushmail-specific domain, but additionally get a pool of 100 aliases to use for a custom domain. Business accounts also gain the ability to use a catch-all alias with their custom domain. The lack of a cloud-based Office equivalent is disappointing, like with the other smaller players. How Hushmail responds to court orders is most likely why it isn't the default choice for a privacy-focused email provider. Viewers with longer memories might remember this story, but to recap, Hushmail divulged the contents of a customer's messages to authorities as the result of a court order, yet at the time, the only way to obtain unencrypted messages between Hushmail customers was to obtain a user's passphrase, either through modifying the code to access the webmail client or modifying the Java applet used for client-side access. The lack of any straight answer as to what the company did or did not do suggests Hushmail implemented some sort of vulnerability to collect this information, and the stigma has followed them ever since. I haven't found any information about Hushmail fighting court orders since, so I feel comfortable in saying much hasn't changed in terms of cooperating with authorities. Hushmail charges $6 per user month for the business tier plus a $10 account setup fee, but the lack of annual payment options for this tier only is strange. At this price, the baseline template would cost $144 per year, in line with other providers. And now we arrive at the wild card, self-hosting your email. I originally hadn't planned to make this part of the comparison since everyone who hosts their own email likely does it differently, but I figured InfoSec nerds would be the one group of people where, if I didn't at least mention the concept, no small number would either ask me why I didn't cover it or claim self-hosting doesn't have any of these issues. If you're self-hosting, you get to choose where your emails are stored, but hosting your email server internationally for increased privacy will likely backfire since you will still be where you think your laws suck, so your local law enforcement can target you instead of your server. Moving on to security-related features, let's be honest. Your email setup is a Raspberry Pi that's maybe just one generation old, running a version of Debian you haven't upgraded since you installed it, and email software from the third post down on are self-hosted. If by some chance your setup supports 2FA, you don't have it enabled. In regards to security-adjacent features, self-hosting means you can run anything you want. Cloud storage, a self-hosted version of Office, the world is your oyster. However, unless you decided you wanted all those things when you began self-hosting, laziness likely overtook you, so you only have functional enough email. On the subject of legal resilience, if a court order arrived at the colo hosting your email server and you're not renting out half the colo, expect them to roll over like a well-trained dog. If for some reason they instead tell the authorities to send it to you, unless you have successful startup exit money, you won't be able to fight it when it arrives, so you'll roll over anyway. Determining a price for self-hosting your own email is tricky, because if your time is in any way valuable, you've already spent too much. And if it isn't, the rest of the process will suck you dry anyway. Assuming you only spend about 1 hour maintaining your email server, a big assumption, you're spending more than Microsoft would charge if your time is worth $200 per hour. Even if your time's worth only half that, you're within spitting distance of most other providers in this review. Even with writing your time off as a learning experience, you'll still have to pay the cost of running a computer somewhere, either your own in a colo or someone else's in their data center. You could stick your email server on the best special low-end box has, but does that really sound like the best idea for privacy or security? Even the cheapest dedicated servers are $40 per month, so after 6 months, you've spent more than Microsoft would have charged you to handle your email for a whole year. Now that the weeks of research have been compiled into the Technicolor table shown here, what can be said about the state of email security? To recap, operational competence is supposedly the best indicator of email providers' ability to protect their users from threats on the internet. But since there is so little direct intelligence on the internet about it, this presentation attempted to compensate by using more public aspects of a provider's service that hopefully correlate. So was this goal met? I don't think so. Microsoft hasn't figured out how to make wildcard aliases work in their 24 years of running an email provider, but I still have more faith in them protecting me from a B-tier threat than 2 Denota. So what does this mean? Aside from the fact that I should stop pretending to be a scientist on the internet, I believe this shows the signals of high operational competence are more fundamental than features providers can stick in checkboxes for comparisons. At this point, I think the least worst signal for determining operational competence might be the size of a dedicated security team. Not the conclusion I wanted, but it's the one I can't shake. At least for now, the big G still has my email. And on that downer of an ending, I conclude my presentation. I do tweets, which are generally less depressing. My handle is on the screen. If you wanted to read this presentation with additional research that was cut for time, you can use the QR code. At this point, we can open up for questions.
Hey everybody, I'm here with our speaker, Jeremy. That was a fantastic talk. I was really surprised with, I was not expecting to see some of the results I was seeing for Google and for Microsoft. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know, since I am also an InfoSec nerd, we tend to give the big corporations kind of a hard time, but as I was going through this to sort of try and justify my reasoning to move away from a big corporation, I was surprised to find how well, they will actually try to take privacy and security seriously. I've heard, a common bromide from someone I follow on Twitter is Google tries to make very sure that your information is only readable by yourself and Google. And it kind of, if you think about it that way, it really does make sense that the things that I show in my talk are what you actually see.
Sure. That does bring us to Mouse's question. So when you talk about Gmail and the fact that the only people who can see it are yourself and Google, what about the privacy of data from Google itself? Mouse says she worries about discussing original research in email that, while it might not be read by humans, is still processed, analyzed, and classified by algorithms specifically designed to surface information Google can use for its own profit. Did you find anything to that regard when you were doing your research, or is that something that you really didn't worry about?
Not directly, because I figured if I were willing to let Google host my email, since practically all email is unencrypted, they're just going to be able to see everything anyway. And also, most likely, if you're emailing somebody and you're not using Google, the person you are emailing is using Google. So they're going to see it no matter what. But also, I don't have the link on me right now because I read about this a while ago, but I believe Google said at one point in time that they weren't going to be scanning emails for, ads and such if you were a paying customer on Google Apps. So I think if you're paying to have Google host your email, it's a lot less likely that they're going to be parsing it for, I guess, useful information, as opposed to just checking to make sure it doesn't look like a phishing email or it looks like spam.
Right, and you also run into the CIA triad here. I mean, I've used Proton Mail for years, and one of the big problems is that while the emails are encrypted, and that gives you good security, that means you can't do full text search for contents of your email. That's a problem that they've been trying to figure out, but it's an issue, right? So yes, you can have security. Yes, you can protect people from looking at your email, but that means that you lose some functionality as well. So on that topic, what are some things that you would like to see companies doing that they're not currently doing?
Oh man, that's a whole nother talk in and of itself. Let's say let's start with passwords. So everybody knows passwords are generally terrible right now. What would be a neat thing for one thing I would love to see smaller companies like Tutanota and Proton Mail do is switch from using passwords directly to using things like password authenticated key exchanges or PAKEs.
Okay.
So they would essentially stop the transmission of passwords over the wire, and you could compute things locally, send those things to the server to log in that you wouldn't that wouldn't be useful for like replay attempts or replay attacks. The thing I've been looking at for a while now is called Opaque, and it is essentially a password authenticated key exchange, key exchange that would essentially allow people to enter their passwords on their local devices and have them never leave their local devices, which would be a really neat security feature. Another thing that I have been looking at is Dime. So after LavaBit imploded, Ladar Levinson created Darkmail, and after in the process of creating Darkmail, he came up with essentially a replacement for SMTP, not exactly SMTP, but like the whole email workflow called Dime. It's the Dark Internet Mail. I forget what the E stands for, but essentially it replaces SMTP, POP, and IMAP with an encrypted, metadata minimized form of email. And even though Darkmail has been around since 2013, 2014, the last version, the last update to the Dime specifications was in 2018. I haven't seen anybody take up the mantle of creating at least a test deployment of this to see if it's actually worthwhile in mid to large scale deployments. I think one of the things you notice about the smaller companies like Proton Mail and Tutanota is that they kind of use their encryption as a sort of mode. So you can encrypt emails between Proton Mail customers and between Tutanota customers, but there's no way to go back and forth. And Dime could essentially be a way to bootstrap encrypted emails to a larger community than just a single provider.
Okay.
But those are the two biggest things that I would like to see companies do.
Sure. One question that we have, I think we have time for a couple more. Jeremy, let's see, who was it that asked that? Okay, AZ Desert Gator asks, is it possible that lack of legal information about Proton Mails because they are in Switzerland, so anyone challenging knows it is likely to be a waste of time?
That may prevent some people, but I don't think it would prevent enough people to the point that I couldn't find information on it. So say if the U.S. Department of Justice wants to get information about Proton Mail customer, they don't care that Proton Mail's in Switzerland. They're still going to file some sort of court document, and I would have expected to see be able to find that court document, see it get rejected or whatever, and potentially even see a blog post from Proton Mail saying, hey, we push back on the US DOJ, good for us. But I couldn't really find anything like that.
Sure. Another question is, have you looked at Trusona?
I have not specifically looked at Trusona. I tried to limit it to the ones that most people would know, but I could always look at other ones and add on to the blog post that's at the end of my talk.
Okay. I think that's all the time we've got, but thank you very much. This was a fantastic talk. I know a lot of people took a lot of value from it, and I think you've done some good work here. So thank you.
Thank you.